right, I'm going to go ahead and get started because for those of you who come every month, thank you very much. And you know, we always start with just a little bit of a introduction to our office for those who might be new. So today we are talking about evaluating your societal impact activities and outcomes. So today it is very much about project specific evaluation. It's really an introduction. It's nuts and bolts. So we hope to share some good terms and practices and tools with you. Next slide, please, Emily. So this is us. We're the Office of Societal Impact. We sit under the Office of Research and Partnership, so the VPR's office. We are really all about research impact and benefit to society from research. We're very committed to particularly our land grant mission. You'll see our vision is to advance a university where research and creative inquiry consistently and equitably improve lives in Arizona and beyond. And do that by centering communities, strengthening practices for impactful research, and embedding societal impact across the research enterprise. And our contact info is there if you want to check out our website. Next slide. Uh, we really are a service unit for ORP. We are here to work with faculty, staff, students, not just who are writing proposals for research, but we do that, of course. We want everyone to have successful competitive proposals, but we do professional development, like this webinar series is one example. We really, as I was saying, are really focused on community engaged research, so helping form community campus partnerships. We have a lot of experience with program design and development. Michelle and I both were those boots on the ground practitioners for many years at the partner, the community agencies. So we understand that world as well. And you'll see the last bubble, evaluation and assessment, is what we're going to talk about today. Next slide. So again, I'm Jen Fields. Michelle Higgins, our associate director, is joining us today. Next slide. And we always want to start with our land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the Atum and the Yaqui. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. Next slide. So as I said, today is very nuts and bolts about evaluation. So we're going to start out with a little bit about what is evaluation, what are some of the terms, how is evaluation different than research, then a little bit of tips for if you're thinking about if you need an evaluation plan for a project or a proposal, some tips for getting started, and then some tools that will really help you create a really concise, competitive evaluation plan, and then we will share some resources with you. Next slide. Next slide. So I'm going to start today just to remind us all, this is the National Science Foundation, who has been the federal agency that has long required a broader impact or a societal impact plan and activities, and therefore has required that you evaluate those activities, right? We're not evaluating the research you're doing. We're evaluating the activities that you have put together and designed with partners in order to achieve a societal benefit. So this is really just reminding us that for NSF, some of the examples of the types of activities and benefits we're talking about. So a lot of times it's about education, improve STEM education, STEM workforce development, broadening participation in the STEM workforce, building infrastructure, increasing public engagement and public literacy, improving well-being, national security, economics. So it's really, like we're saying, these societal benefits that you're creating activities around to achieve some stated outcomes related to these types of benefits. So that's what we're talking about today, evaluating those activities to know if you're on the right track and if what you're doing is working. Next slide. And so We like to think of, for everyone out there who is a researcher or who works with researchers, you're on a journey, a long highway of many different individual grants, individual projects. So this is meant to be one of those projects along your long journey. And for each specific project, again, often a funded project, maybe by a federal agency, maybe by a foundation, you're doing some sort of activities. And on the left, you'll see that might be workforce development, it might be education, it might be building infrastructure, it might be doing these things with different partners, right? And you design and develop some activities because you want to have some of those impacts on the far right. That's your long-term goal. So during the course of your research project, you're doing these activities and you're evaluating them so that that evaluation can inform the work you're doing, and you can make little changes to it along the way based on what your evaluation is telling you. What's working, for whom, in what circumstances, what changes might help this work move along a little better. We just wanted to set that stage that what we're talking about today is really this idea of evaluating your impact activities on specific projects. Okay, next slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.
Thanks so much, Jen. Let's get to that first bullet. So today I'm going to go through just a quick introduction to what evaluation is, how it's different than research, and a little bit about the roles of an evaluator. An evaluation is a set of approaches and techniques used to make judgments about the effectiveness or quality of a program or intervention. As Jen mentioned, you might be including some of these types of interventions or programs to reach that impact. The evaluation is the set of techniques that you're going to use to determine how well you are making that impact. Next bullet. So the findings are used to improve your program's effectiveness or to inform decisions about the design, development, and implementation of your project. And it just gives you that feedback of what do I do next? Do I need to make any changes? And the final bullet, oh, we have two more. Next bullet. It provides evidence to demonstrate whether a program or activity has worked. And final bullet, it can also advance the field by providing information to those outside your project, funders, policymakers, and in particular, practitioners. As Jen mentioned, that was us using this information. Next slide, please. Okay, so one of the biggest misunderstandings that we see is like the difference between research and evaluation because they're not the same. The purpose of research is to generate new knowledge. Evaluation is about making evaluative claims and judgments that can be used for decision making and actions. Evaluators and researchers, though, often work together to really provide that full picture of the project or program or intervention. Next slide, please. Okay, so research generally asks how something happens or why it happens. You have an intervention, how does it work? What's that theoretical framework that's at play? An evaluation generally asks, did it happen or did it not happen? And to what extent? So, did you do the intervention and did you produce the impacts that you wanted? And to what extent did you do that? So, that's kind of the easiest way to explain the difference between the two. I've had some instances where I have evaluated some projects and got questions as the evaluator. Well, why didn't this work? It's not a question that the evaluator often answers, but just to say, here's the extent to how much it worked. Next slide. Okay, so I really like this slide also. This kind of talks about the flavor of a soup as an analogy. How does the flavor of soup change if I use different ingredients? What happens to the texture if I cook the soup in at a different temperature or in a different method, right? That's those research questions. Evaluation would ask, did they use the appropriate procedures when cooking the soup? Did they use the procedures they said they were going to? Did they consider the proper ingredients when planning the recipe? So these are kind of the different kinds of questions that a researcher and an evaluator would ask. Next slide, please. All right. So how do you know if you need an evaluation plan? So if you're writing a proposal that includes activities meant to achieve a societal impact, just as Jen had mentioned earlier, you will likely need some way to decide whether or not you have achieved those impacts. And also within the funding solicitation, they will probably provide some requirements around an evaluator if that's what they're interested in. They will let you know. So it's up to you to read and be up to date on the solicitation and what the funder requires. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are different types of evaluation and evaluators that a funder might require. The first one is that the evaluator can be internal to the project. That means somebody on your team can conduct the evaluation. So they might be the ones who are administering surveys, collecting the data and summarizing and making um, decisions about to the extent to which you've achieved your impact. The next one is by having an external advisory board. They can be the evaluator for your project. Sometimes you might find researchers on this advisory board, but their job is really to look across and see, did you do what you said you were going to do? And to what extent did you meet your goals? The next one is if the evaluator has to be external to the project, but can be internal to your organization or institution. So that might be that you find an evaluator if you are a researcher at the U of A, that you find your evaluator maybe outside your department, maybe from our office, from other offices, but they're still at the university or within your organization. And the final one, the evaluator has to be external to the institution or the organization. Mostly we see that with the very large grants. And so you need a lot of teams will find evaluators at other institutions. They just can't come from your own institution. But again, the funder will let you know through the solicitation. Next slide. I just wanted to mention a little bit about what is the evaluator responsible for? What do they do? So they implement the assessment for the activities and document the success of the project in relation to the goals and expected outcomes. Again, did the team do what they said they were going to do? And did they have the impact they thought they were going to have? And to what extent did they succeed in their goals? So they also assess the quality of the program design, the fidelity of implementation, and gathers and interprets evidence to demonstrate the outcomes. So that's kind of the responsibility. They're not the ones deciding what to do with the project, but they may be making recommendations based on the evidence they've collected. Next slide. So this, I think, is really important to think about is who's interested in your evaluation report. So they're typically conducted for this says the clients, but that's really the people who are running the project or the program. The person who wants to make these impacts, they're going to be really interested in whether or not they've achieved the goals that they set out to achieve. Next. Your funder, that's going to be the primary person who really wants your evaluation report because they want to make sure that their funds are going to what you said you were going to put them towards and to achieve those goals. And next, other stakeholders. This is where sometimes when we consult with teams, ask them to think about what other stakeholders might be interested in your evaluation report. Um, so sometimes it's your collaborators. It might be administrators in your department or department head. Um, the participants of the project, they would like to know how well this project is working. They're the ones who went through it. Your colleagues in tangential fields, future collaborators, and I also want to put in there other organizations or institutions who have similar types of projects. They really want to know, did yours work well? How did you overcome this? Or what did you do for that? There's a lot of people who are really interested in your evaluation report. Just something to kind of think about and keep in mind. Okay, next. So, as I've been mentioning, that this sort of formalizes it that there are two types of evaluations. One is a process or implementation evaluation. Did you do what you said you were going to do? Were the program activities implemented as you intended them to be implemented? And if not, was that documented? What decisions did you make to deviate from the plan? And then the second type is outcome or effectiveness evaluation. Um, it assesses the progress towards your outcomes or impact that the program is to achieve, right? Did it do what you thought it was going to do? Next slide. Okay. We think of evaluation in three stages. The front end um, really sets you up for your planning project. So maybe you need to know a baseline of your stakeholders or the participants, and that's going to help you to um, design your intervention or project. So that's at the front of your project before you get going during the planning stages. The formative evaluation happens during your project, and it will help you to make decisions about whether or not you need to make improvements or make some changes to your project before it ends. And then the summative is at the end of the project, and it really gives that overall view of did you do what you said you were going to do? And to what extent did you have the impact you intended? And next slide. This is very important also because oftentimes an evaluation needs a budget. So if it's an internal evaluation, meaning you are doing the evaluation or maybe a collaborator, um, you want to think about the time that somebody is putting in and making sure that you're accounting for the salary that they're going to be, that's required to carry it out. If you're working with an external evaluator, um, you're going to want to put at least 5% of your project budget to the evaluator. And it kind of depends too on how big your project is. The bigger the project, the more the percentage will increase because there are more moving parts and more people involved. And then sometimes an evaluation advisory board, um, they might they might be there just to provide their expertise, or sometimes I've seen that they're provided a stipend. But just making sure that you know what kind of evaluation plan you need and making sure that you have an appropriate budget. Okay, next slide. Let's see. Okay, so a plan. Um, First of all, it starts early. It can't be something that it gets tacked on at the very last because your evaluation plan should be created along with the creation of your intervention or project. Um, the evaluation plan also has its own evaluation questions. They're often related to the research questions, but they are not the research questions. They are their own evaluation questions. Um, you will need a plan to collect data that's coordinated with the project, um, making sure that collecting data is a viable activity during a particular time in the cycle of your project. So those things have to coordinate. I've seen some projects where um, they might be working with K-12 teachers and the academic year has ended, teachers are gone, and they were intending to collect data over the summer. So that's kind of what I'm talking about coordinating it. A logic model is very helpful, that it's almost your evaluation at a glance. And Jen is going to go over that in the tool section. So you'll see that, but that's very helpful. Um, Making sure that you have a plan to disseminate your findings, not just uploading your final report to the funder, but who else needs to know and how do what kinds of ways are you disseminating the information? Also include the bio of your evaluator so that reviewers of your project um, can determine how qualified they are to evaluate this project. So all of these pieces have to be considered. And next slide. So I know I went through very quickly, but those are all the basics of evaluation. I'm going to hand it over to Jen, who's going to talk about like how do you get started? What are some tools to use and help you on your way with those things? Jen?
Thanks, Michelle. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so Michelle already talked a little bit about this, but we really can't emphasize enough this idea of getting an evaluator on board early. Again, the bigger the project, the more important this is. Everything sort of scales. But if you are going after a project that's like a science and technology center, a regional engine, of a large educational project like a national research traineeship grant or an NIH training grant, or you really want to have your evaluator identified and on board early so that your planning really is collaborative, and the evaluator can be really helpful to you in crafting the goals and objectives for your societal impact activities. We know that scientific researchers, their priority is the science and that's their expertise. And so having that evaluator on board and doing this collaborative planning makes for a better project. But it's also a professional consideration. I mean, Michelle and I have both evaluated on federal projects and all sorts of other projects. And you often get that call at the last minute because all the focus has been on the science and the research and the other aspects of the proposal. And then at the very last minute, oh, we need an evaluator, we need an evaluation plan. Who can help me? So really, the earlier you can start that, the better, again, especially if it's a very large project. And one of the reasons we do this is because, again, the evaluation plan really needs to be tailored to your specific proposed activities and your specific outcomes. It's not enough to just say, the evaluation question isn't just, was this project successful? Successful at what? And we'll go into those questions and what that means. And it all flows from this logic model that you're going to see. So, next slide, please. And so you're going to see two things. One is going to be this logic model. Like Michelle said, it's sort of the blueprint for your project and your activities and what you expect the outcomes to be from those activities. And that allows the project leadership and the evaluator to say, okay, here's what you're going to do and here's what you're hoping to achieve. So how are we going to provide evidence or document that that happened? So what data will support success or failure? Not every project is a success, and we always talk that way, and we're always sometimes um, afraid to tell a funder, hey, guess what? It didn't actually work. But I actually, I wish we would do more of this because things always don't turn out as intended. And that's the point of doing kind of this iterative evaluation is that you can step back, take a look at what's happening and make adjustments. So as you're trying to do this, what data are you going to collect? What are the sources going to be? Maybe it's institutional data. Maybe it's programmatic data like attendance sheet records. Maybe you're giving out surveys. There's all sorts of sources. Again, we'll talk a little bit more. How are you collecting this data? Who is collecting it? Is it the program coordinator? Is it the evaluator? Um, and then how are you going to analyze or interpret this data? Maybe you're comparing it to a control group. Maybe you're comparing it to past data about participants. Maybe this is brand new. So it's just a little bit of a statement about, okay, we're collecting all this data, but what are we going to do with it? How are we going to know if what it's telling us that we were successful or not so successful? Next slide. So one of the things, and a lot of the information today that we're talking about is really in the context of writing a proposal. So you want to do this project, you're writing a proposal to a funder, and you need to do enough work at the proposal stage so that the reviewers are confident that like you have an evaluation plan, you have an evaluator identified, but it's a proposal, like everything. It's sort of a forward investment. You hope you get funded, and so having a very clear evaluation plan that convinces the reviewers that you're ready for this is important. And two things that I think help, not just in the evaluation plan, but proposals in general, is having some tables or charts. Oftentimes it's just narrative, 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 and it's really easy to get lost in all that narrative. And so after you've kind of described things, like have one of those summary charts or tables that makes it really clear to reviewers. Um, these are the questions. This is, all those things we just talked about. Like summarizing it in a table is really more helpful, I think, to reviewers than just endless narrative. And then attaching a timeline to it. Michelle talked a little bit about the timing of these things. And it is important for reviewers to see that you've been thoughtful about how often you're collecting data, when you're collecting it. Is it a pre and a post? Is it an annual? Does the timing make sense with your program activities? And then also seeing that you have built in that iterative function. Okay, we're doing the evaluation here, we're analyzing it, and then we're going to meet and we're going to discuss and we're going to make changes if necessary before we run this thing the second year, right? So those two things I think can really help a proposal be digestible by the reviewers and help them really understand that you do have a solid plan. So a summary chart or table, and then some timeline element. Okay, so those are just sort of some tips. Now we're going to move in, next slide, to some of the tools that you can help facilitate this work. So this is a logic model. Michelle already mentioned a logic model. And this is one of my favorite templates because it helps, I think, people digest what we mean when we say, kind of outputs versus outcomes. So an output is more of a deliverable, a thing. You know, you're creating a curriculum, you're creating a module for something. You have actual participants, a specific number of participants that you're trying to recruit that are perhaps a certain demographic, depending on your activities or your project. So those are sort of the outputs and the activities. So to us, the most important things of the logic model are the green column and the kind of pinkish column. But I don't want to ignore the rest if you're really being thorough. You're thinking about your project as a whole. Like Michelle said, it's sort of like your project on a page, right? So if you go to the far left, you're kind of thinking about the situation, the needs, the problems, the stakeholders, like what is the rationale for doing this project? What is driving you to do this project? And then sometimes you have to compare that to some priorities. Is this something your department is supportive of? Does it match with the vision and the values of your department? What are the local dynamics? Who are your collaborators? So some of that is like almost that front end evaluation, if you will, that we were talking about. You know, those thinking through the elements of, is this a good project? Are we on solid ground to start with? Okay, we are great. We all think this is a great project we need to go for. So then, of course, you start thinking about the inputs, the yellow column. Who's involved? What kind of staff time do we have or need? What kind of money do we have or need? Materials, equipment. You're kind of thinking about what do we need to carry out this project. So, of course, those are important elements of a project. But really, where we start diving in is this idea of outputs and outcomes. And those are the things that are going to be evaluated. So, I already talked a little bit about the idea of outputs, people, products, sort of some of those more countable or quantifiable things sometimes. But then the outcomes are what you want to gain from doing these activities. You're doing it because you want to see this change. And so we like to think of those in short term and medium term outcomes. And those that's really the space where you're evaluating. Your long-term impact on the very far right of this chart, you're not going to necessarily measure that or see that in the context of a 2-year project, a 4-year project, but that's really the long-term goal that's driving you to do this work, to do this set of activities. So really, if you look at your kind of short-term and medium-term outcomes, that's where the heart of your evaluation is going to live. And so if you look at some of the short-term changes, you're looking for perhaps changes in awareness or knowledge about something, changes in an attitude about something, skills. You're teaching them a new skill. You're changing their interest, opinions, aspirations. Now I want to go to college and study science. You know what I mean? So those are some of those short-term outcomes that you are setting for your project. It's not all of these. This is just an illustrative example of some of the things you might be trying to do. Your medium term outcomes get to kind of changes in the way people act, the things people do. So changes in behavior. So let's say you're working on a project that really is about recycling and you're trying to promote recycling. You're starting a new recycling center and you're going to do public engagement activities to promote recycling. Those short-term outcomes are like, okay, we've got people aware, you know, we have a recycling center here. They're aware, they've built some knowledge around, you know, how to recycle, what products are recyclable, do I need to wash them, how do I sort them and separate them? I've given them some skills in that sense. Those are some of your short-term outcomes, but your more medium-term outcomes that you do hope to be able to demonstrate by the end of your project is that people are doing this, that they have increased their recycling, that they have changed. Like I never used to rinse, not this is an example. I never used to rinse my milk carton. I would just throw it in the recycle. But wow, I learned that you can only recycle if it's clean. And once there's something dirty in it, it ruins the whole bucket of recyclables. So I've changed my behavior and now I rinse every carton before I put it in the recycle bin. So those are some of the examples of those kind of short and medium term outcomes that we should be able to evaluate, we should be able to collect evidence somehow and document the extent to which those things are happening. It's not 100%. It will never be 100%. It's just meant to show, hey, these are the things they did. They really wanted to see these changes. Yes, here's some evidence that we have seen these changes starting to take place. So your logic model is your friend. It helps you lay out what activities you're doing and what you hope to get from doing those activities.
Hey, Jen,
Yep.
I have just a quick comment because I know we both really love logic models. One of the things that we will see in two slides from now is there's also can be a column for your activity. So that the activity, when you read across a row for that particular activity, that might have, let's say you have two activities. For the recycling, I'm going to do a poster and I'm going to hang it up in a community center. And once a month, I'm going to do a workshop. So those are two activities, and those are going to have different inputs, different resources. They might have different outputs, and you might expect different behaviors or like those short-term and intermediate outcomes from them. And it's nice to be able to delineate which outcome came from which activity that you did. So this logic model doesn't show that, but I know we have one coming up. I just wanted to point out that sometimes you do all of these things for each of your activities.
Yeah, and I appreciate that point. And this logic model does have an activities column. So just to give you some ideas, we're developing products or we're delivering content or services, we're conducting workshops, we're et cetera, et cetera. But to Michelle's very important point is that oftentimes your logic model is divided by this is the activity and these are the outcomes. Okay, this is activity number two and these are the outcomes. And it really helps you keep it helps your evaluator in determining, okay, what are going to be my data sources and my evidence to show that, but it helps you as the project leader to really see the rationale, to kind of see, because a lot of times we have this laundry list of activities. Okay, I'm going to have a booth there and I'm going to publish in this magazine and then I'm going to do this other thing and then I'm going to do this other thing over here with a totally different audience. So your logic model sort of lets you see, am I doing too much? Does it make sense? Are they related to each other? How does the timing work? So it's a really nice way to kind of lay out what you're doing, what you hope to achieve by that, and see kind of where you stand, if you need to scale back, if you need to beef it up. Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. Okay, next slide. So we've talked about this idea of evaluation questions. And so, not just the very broad, um, was this project successful? But this idea of, let's go back to the recycling example. Your evaluation question would be specific to your activities. So, like Michelle said, one activity is a poster. So maybe your question is maybe you have a couple evaluation questions just about that activity. Was the venue was this the proper venue to show the poster? Did it get enough traffic? Something like that. Was the poster format accessible? Like, was it easy to read? Did it have the right graphics? So your evaluation questions start to drill down a little more specifically about your activities. You might have 3 to 7 questions. You don't want to overdo it, but you certainly don't have just one evaluation question because, as you can see, they sort of get at different activities and different elements of the activities. Um, and you really do need to have questions that address both the implementation part, like did they, okay, did they make the poster? Did they go 3 times like they said, or only 1 time like they were, or they actually only did it 1 time, and why? So that then you can kind of overcome, oh, it only happened once because this venue wasn't so great. Oh, okay, next year we're going to choose a different venue. So again, it's just this idea of, did you do it? Was it successful? If not, what can we do to improve the next go round? Okay, next slide. So this is just a sample evaluation question. This was for a project that was setting up a number of educational pathways. It was this NSF technology education program. And I've used this table a lot and I don't remember the exact project, but it had to do with setting up like technology trainings for youth. And so, to what extent are students using the pathways established in the project? So, I'm assuming there were multiple, like they could come to a lab and do XYZ, or they could, whatever, there were a few different pathways. So, this table, I think, is really useful. We talked about kind of creating a summary table that helps people understand some of these important elements. The last 2 columns, the analysis and the interpretation, um, those are when you really dig deep. Not every evaluation table at the proposal stage has these. Once you get funded and you actually have a project, you do want to, of course, think about these things. But when you're at the proposal stage, it's really these first 4 columns that are important. And there are some illustrative examples. Again, it's about the reviewers seeing that, like, I understand the assignment. I have a few ideas here. It can change a little if you're actually funded. But so for this question specifically, um, they've on the far left, you'll see indicators and then data sources and methods, who the responsible party is, and what the timing is. So this matches that slide we had a little earlier. What data are you collecting? How are you collecting it? Who is collecting it, and when are you collecting it? Okay, so next slide. So your indicators are kind of what you're measuring. And again, it's useful to have multiple indicators. Some are quantitative, countable things. Some are more qualitative. So on the example we saw, one of the indicators was numbers of students that participated in each of the different activities or pathways. Another question was about, percentage of, so numbers, percentage, maybe some of the demographics about the people who participate. But then it had some questions about um, the students' perceptions about things. And then some questions about behavior. So, the first question of their perceptions, are they more interested? Do they indicate that they're more likely to do a certain thing? And then the fourth indicator was like, how many did do dual enrollment for whatever the purposes of this project were. So you have a few different indicators. Some are quantitative, some are qualitative, but it's you thinking about, okay, what are those pieces of evidence that I can collect about this project that will help me demonstrate I'm reaching these outcomes that I have said I want to reach. Next slide. So then you start thinking about data sources. Okay, if my indicator is the number of students that participate in XYZ, where do I find that? Do I have a sign-in sheet? Is someone taking attendance? Do they log in because it's an online thing? So what is the source of that data? Okay, another indicator was about a student's perception. How am I going to know what the student's perceptions are? Maybe I do a pre and a post survey. Maybe I do an interview with students after they have the experience and they're able to verbalize, oh, I used to feel this way. And after taking part in this activity, I feel like this. So you have your indicators, but then you start thinking about, okay, where does that data come from? Interviews of staff, participants, your project partners. It might be institutional records. Sometimes it's project artifacts. Sometimes we actually look at products that the students develop. to see if like their understanding about something or their concepts about something has changed. So there's all sorts of ways you can find data and data sources for evaluation. It's really about this idea of it being aligned with those questions and those indicators that are going to show, yes, we're making progress. Yes, we're seeing our intended outcomes happening. All right, next slide. So, this is a little more about what I just said, this idea of how you're collecting data. Again, if it's surveys, if it's focus groups, some things you have to actively plan and do. Other things are kind of static. Like, again, if they log in on D2L, you just go in and collect that data, right? But if you're going to make a survey to find something out, does that survey exist already that would be applicable? Do you need to design a survey with the project staff? Um, if you're going to do interviews, do you need IRB? Like, this is where you start thinking about some of your methods, and what that will entail. Is it an existing tool, a new tool? Do I need approval from someone? How am I going to store that data? That's where you start thinking about these things. And reviewers at federal funding agencies do care about these things. Most require a data management plan, and people often think, oh, that's just the research data. No, it's also the evaluation data. So be thinking about those kind of methods. Next.
Jen,
Oh,
I
yep,
just wanted to mention too that sometimes your collaborators or your stakeholders also have collected the data that is available to you. So don't forget to include them when you think about who can collect this data.
absolutely. Thank you, Michelle. Because evaluation can be a heavy lift. That's why it does cost money and it's not free, because you can imagine the more of these things you do with the more people, and then you interpret it and then you analyze it all, it can start to add up. And so it is really smart to think about what data might my collaborators have or could collect. What data exists that's a little easier to collect? How do I get the data I need, but minimize the cost by not doing an interview every month, or individual interviews. Maybe I do a focus interview once a year because that's more cost effective and I can still get the kind of information I need. So these are all things to consider as you're putting your evaluation plan together. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then we talked about this idea of who is collecting and analyzing data. And I think it's important to talk about this ahead of time because I think there is sometimes the impression that the evaluator will do all of it. And again, depending on the size and scope of your project, the size and scope of the evaluation team, it's not only would that become very expensive, but it makes more sense for let's say the program coordinator to collect attendance data and give that to the evaluator. Then the evaluator can analyze it. Okay, they were at 75% of their target goal. You know what I mean? But should the evaluator come to every event and do the sign-in sheet? No. So again, thinking through the different types of data and sources, who it makes the most sense to collect. You're not going to want to have your program coordinator, though, do your focus group interviews because your evaluator is kind of external. Sometimes, if you're trying to get people's honest feedback about an experience, they might not feel comfortable saying to their beloved program coordinator who they love dearly, saying like, you know what, this thing really sucked, or this thing was, not good, or you just never know. So it's like certain types of data collection are better for that external person to do, whereas other types of data, it's perfectly fine and acceptable and better for members of your project team to go ahead and collect that. So again, that's why this evaluation is a very collaborative effort. Even though oftentimes people think of evaluation as sort of external and unbiased, that doesn't mean it's not collaborative. It really needs to be very collaborative so that you, the evaluator, and the project leader are on the same page. They're working together. They understand kind of capacity and limitations so that we just don't have surprises or hard feelings down the road. So, communication and collaboration with your evaluator is super important. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then the last thing we talked about was this idea of timing. So again, different types of data will be collected at different times, right? If you're having an event, of course, you're going to take that attendance every single event you have. If you're doing a focus group, we just talked about maybe that's annually. Maybe you, Michelle gave the great example of teachers. If you want feedback from teachers, during the summer is probably not the best time to get that. So, thinking about your timing, not only in the context of activities and when they happen, but also, like we've mentioned, in the context of that idea of being able to make program improvements before you run this thing the next time. Because most often, when you have these types of activities, it's not just a one and done. Usually, you're creating something that is gonna, it's a camp that runs every summer, or it's a short course that runs every winter, or it's a undergraduate research experience every spring, or whatever it is. Usually, it's not the same people. Of course, you have new participants each year, but the activities are meant to be essentially the same, but your evaluation has informed it to make any little improvements that can happen. And then your evaluation can pick that up the next year and show that you're making this growth. So again, the last thing is just thinking through the timing of this. So those are kind of the nuts and bolts of thinking through an evaluation plan. Michelle is going to talk about some resources that are available to you here on campus. And then we are happy to open it up for questions. So Michelle, back to you.
Thanks, Jen. Um, yeah, next slide. So these are just a couple of resources. Um, so this center is it a center? Uh, um, they do evaluation, program evaluation. They are very busy. They are expert evaluators, but they are in great demand. So if this is something that you're looking for, they are on campus here at the U of A. This would be an evaluator that's external to your project, but within the same organization institution. And they do amazing work. We have worked with them on many projects and really can highly recommend them. Okay, next slide.
And I will just
Yeah,
add about Cred that they are out of Kales.
yeah.
They really specialize. They do a lot of work in the youth space if you're doing projects that involve youth participants, and then a lot of stuff that's related to extension type of projects. But that doesn't mean that if you're not with like if you're not with Kales, still reach out to them if they have capacity.
So this one, Indigenous Strategies, is an external organization that bases their evaluation framework on the 7 R's: respect, relevance, reciprocity, responsibility, relatedness, relationships, and redistribution, that are really important if you are working with Indigenous or Native American communities, tribal communities. You're looking to reach out even to sometimes even when you're working with rural communities, they have a wonderful framework for their evaluation. Next. And that's Melody Lopez. I've known her, wow, for like 20 years. This is an individual. Jen, I wrote her name down, but now I can't find it.
Stanlin Buxner.
Sandlin Buxner, how can I forget? She has been on campus for decades doing program evaluation, education research. She is just like an A1 star when it comes to evaluating projects. She's a great team member and she has a lot of projects under her belt. She's very well respected as a researcher and an evaluator. Next. And then this is a relatively new center. Center for Educational Assessment Research and Evaluation, headed up by Adriana Semeta out of Education Psychology. First of all, she is an amazing evaluator by herself. However, this center trains graduate students to learn about education, research, and evaluation. And if you bring her on as the evaluator, she uses this as a training opportunity for her students. We've worked with several of their students, and on, they are like on spot. They're just learning, so they want to do everything just right and by the book. They're really great to work with, and you will get an amazing evaluation if you go with SEER. And finally, the Southwest Institute for Research on Women, they kind of specialize in a few areas, as you can see here, but they are phenomenal researchers, especially um, to capture um, the impact on society with particular um, subjects or collaborators. I've seen their work with housing insecurity, poverty, substance abuse. They do really good work. And not only that, they're really great at distributing their findings to not just the funder, not just to the team, but to influencers and stakeholders in the communities that really, really need this information. So they're a great partner to have. And and then our last slide. These are just some resources that we have on our website. Jen, do you want to talk a little bit about these?
Yeah, I was gonna put them as live links in the slides, but then I realized we have a bunch of them on our website,
Yeah.
and it seemed better to just point you that direction. I will say that right now these are behind NetID, so I know we have at least one person on the call today that is not a U of A person who's external to the U of A. Please reach out to us at
Yes.
our email impact@arizona.edu. We're happy to send you any resource, but we try to kind of just keep populating our resource section of the website when we find new and fun resources. But a lot of these, you'll see the first thing is this logic model template that we showed on the slide. The one of them about halfway down, the principal investigator's guide to managing evaluation in informal STEM ed projects. I really always, it's not new by any stretch, but it really helps the PI, the science researcher, who this is not their forte necessarily, but it's a required part of their grant that they're applying for. It's written from that perspective for someone who might be new to this. There's one specific to citizen science. So there's one for undergraduate research. So we try to kind of continually put resources there that we think are helpful to different types of projects and different types of evaluation. And the evaluation flashcards that's about the middle of the list is also like a very kind of simple way with your new to evaluation to think through creating your evaluation plan. So there's lots and lots of resources on our website. So please visit it. And again, if you're not U of A, you don't have a net ID, just reach out to our email and we're happy to share with you. It's 1 o'clock, and I know we have another half hour set aside for questions for those of you who are able to stay. We are happy to continue to answer any questions you might have. I do want to give a little plug. Our last Pathways to Impact seminar is on May 1st. Allison, who is here or was here in the room, she might have had to dip out, um, will be doing that with me. And it's really more about assessing impact at like the unit level, the college level, the institutional level. Today was about projects, but if your unit wants to talk about 10 projects that are very, very different, how do you do that succinctly, right? Without having 10 separate evaluation reports. So that's what we're doing on May 1st, and we hope to see you then. But we are happy to answer any questions. We're a very small group. If you want to just unmute yourself and or put anything in the chat. And if not, if we don't have any, thanks, Tina. Good to see you here today.
Yeah.
Thanks, Olivia. And we will, these are going to be available on our website. I think we also send them out to all the folks who have
Mhm.
registered. Tina, you came off camera for a second. Did you want to say anything or just saying hi?
No, hi. I was just saying hello. I just wanted to thank you. It was very practical and timely. And I'm starting to, it's getting my thought process going as we start to think about resources to share with tribal communities. So I
Mhm.
was happy to see the resources that you provided. Yeah, we'll be in touch because I think this is very, very practical and useful for a lot of people.
Great, excellent. And
Thanks,
we are here,
Tina.
like we said, we're a service unit. So even if you're not writing a proposal, if you just want to talk about evaluation of a specific project or an idea for a project, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. That's what we're here for, to consult with you and help you work through the process, help you identify evaluators if you need external evaluators. We are here to help.